Good morning, evening, or night, wherever you are. Welcome to WHAM today. Take a deep breath, clear your mind, and let's drift through the whispers of today's world, one quiet thought at a time. As we wrap up Saturday, 12th April 2025, let's see what stories are unfolding around us. China is grappling with severe weather and intensifying trade disputes. Extreme windstorms originating from Mongolia have battered Beijing and northern China, resulting in flight cancellations, park closures, and warnings for residents to stay indoors, with wind speeds potentially exceeding records set in 1951. Trees were uprooted in Jiangsu. In response to US tariffs, China has imposed a 125% tariff on US goods, with Commerce Minister Wang Wentao informing the WTO that US tariffs destabilize developing countries and the US itself. China opposes the Japan-NATO Defense Cooperation Accord. As China and the EU seek new trade partners due to US tariffs, concerns are rising about Europe becoming a dumping ground for cheap goods. Xi Jinping has refused to back down in the tariff confrontation with President Trump. Tesla has halted orders in China for US imported models due to the increased tariffs and has quietly stopped selling its Model S and Model X vehicles there. An American firm dodged China's tariff hikes by selling off millions in inventory, anticipating the escalation of tariffs. China is also focusing on strengthening neighborhood ties. Experts suggest that China's urban giants may face challenges with declining workforces as population declines accelerate. A trade war impacting China's economy may have devastating effects on Africa by impacting demand for commodities. Turning to the United States, the Trump administration's trade policies continue to generate ripples. President Trump has exempted smartphones and computers from tariffs on imports from China and other countries, aiming to prevent consumer price increases. Despite China's retaliatory tariffs, President Trump defends his tariff policy, while the White House claims 15 countries have offers on the table. Economists, however, caution that trade disruption could increase consumer prices and trigger a global recession. The U.S. has increased its tariff on Chinese goods, leading to China's retaliatory increase of tariffs on U.S. imports to 125%. Biotech firms are caught in the crosshairs of Trump's tariffs. The U.S. and Japan are expanding space cooperation beyond civilian projects, citing a severe security environment in East Asia. The escalating trade war between the U.S. and China has led to market turbulence and global economic uncertainty. The rising tariffs on Chinese and US exports are diminishing bilateral trade. As China and the EU seek new trade partners in response to US tariffs, concerns are rising about Europe becoming a dumping ground for cheap goods. China is seeking British backing to defend international trade as Trump's tariff war escalates, indicating a readiness to work with the UK on trade and defend its response to the US. United States. The United States has seen Donald Trump's trade policies and tariffs significantly impacting the economy and international relations, drawing both support and opposition. Despite recession fears, Trump insists his trade war is doing really well, even as Beijing hikes tariffs on US exports. However, his policies have been criticized for potentially damaging not only his political credibility, but also the credibility of globalization. These policies have led to a slump in the US dollar and a peak in gold prices as investors seek safe haven assets, while US consumer sentiment is tumbling and expectations of rising unemployment have reached their highest level since 2009. US consumer expectations for price growth have soared to a 4-decade high. Right-wing media outlets have generally supported Trump's trade policies and tariffs, even as global markets have collapsed. As global markets fell, Trump spent his time golfing, dining with donors, and making insouciant declarations like this is a great time to get rich. The Trump administration's trade tariffs have sparked opposition and boycott campaigns against American products from consumers and companies. The EU is developing countermeasures to Trump's tariffs, seeking a unified response to escalating us tariffs on EU exports. The White House announced tariff exemptions for smartphones and computers, removing reciprocal tariffs from a range of electronic goods. As tit-for-tat tariffs escalate between Washington and Beijing, the world's two biggest economies are increasingly decoupling. Us soybean farmers face market uncertainty due to Donald Trump's trade policies and fears of market volatility. Economists say that us manufacturing regions with high exposure to import competition suffer more due to trade issues. Us EU and German business chambers in China are preparing for a long-lasting trade war, which may offer opportunities for third countries. Observers suggest that the US-China tariff war could end as quickly as it began, with both sides leaving room for negotiations. The White House says Trump is waiting for Beijing to make the first move for a deal, while China's Commerce Ministry calls his levies a joke amid us, and China exchange barbs over tariffs. The U.S. has reportedly demanded control of a key Ukrainian pipeline carrying Russian gas, which a senior Kyiv economist described as colonial-type bullying. A U.S. judge ruled that Mahmoud Khalil can be deported for his views, siding with the Trump administration's claim that his beliefs and associations are counter to us foreign policy interests. Professor of law WHAM said estimates that the U.S. has no tangible evidence against Mahmoud Khalil. The Trump administration says it needs more time to plan the return of a man who was mistakenly deported to an El Salvador prison, prompting a judge to question why the U.S. cannot locate him. A judge ruled that the U.S. can deport Columbia University student Mahmoud Khalil, a pro-Palestinian activist arrested under Trump's crackdown on students. Colonel Susan Myers was fired after she sent an email showing support for Greenland and Denmark amid Trump's threats to annex the territory. In other news from the U.S., Tahawul Hussain Rana, a suspect in the Mumbai attacks, has arrived in Delhi after extradition from the U.S. A think tank audit found only 7 out of 25 items had a strong defense industrial base and calls for significant improvements. Experts say that if there is more US public health funding, tuberculosis could end amid public health program cuts. Tawana Looney's body rejected the animal organ, but previous recipients of such transplants did not survive past 2 months. Australia. Moving to Australia, the Prime Minister and the opposition leader campaigned in Perth. Plibersek deflected a question about potentially becoming the opposition leader if Labour loses, emphasizing her focus on re-electing an Albanese Labour government. Jacinta Nampijinpa Price stated that the coalition will make Australia great again and rejected comparisons to Donald Trump at a campaign rally in Perth. A tropical cyclone is likely to form off the northern coast of Western Australia this weekend, while Southeast Australia prepares for unseasonably warm weather. In a disturbing incident, an Australian woman unknowingly gave birth to a stranger's baby after an IVF clinic error. China. Turning our attention to China, Chen Min and Shenji, a star Chinese mathematician couple, have returned home to join IT in Ningbo after decades in the US. Observers suggest that US involvement and sanctions are already factored into planning for any actions towards Taipei by mainland China. China's Commerce Ministry calls Trump's levies a joke amid us and China exchange barbs over tariffs. European Union. Across the Atlantic, Germany's Social Democrats and Conservatives are eager to form a coalition amid the global economic and political uncertainty influenced by Trump and Putin. The EU is considering a deal with the US amid a temporary trade truce, pausing retaliatory tariffs on US goods while seeking a deal with the Trump administration. The EU is developing countermeasures to Trump's tariffs, seeking a unified response to escalating US tariffs on EU export. US, EU, and German business chambers in China are preparing for a long-lasting trade war, which may offer opportunities for third countries. Iran. Finally, in Iran, amid Trump's threat of war, The US and Iran held constructive talks in Oman, with Oman acting as an intermediary. With Trump's threats and a tight 2-month deadline, analysts warn that failure to compromise could trigger a dangerous escalatory cycle. Amid escalating tensions in the Middle East, Iran is engaged in mediated talks with the US in Oman, seeking an initial understanding for potential negotiation. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi and U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff are leading these discussions. The talks, authorized by Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, due to fears of war and economic instability, aim to define parameters for sanctions, relief, and adjustments to Iran's nuclear program. These indirect negotiations are being held in a constructive atmosphere and are expected to continue, possibly leading to direct discussions. The White House has cautioned of severe repercussions should Iran develop a nuclear weapon. Former President Trump has also threatened military intervention if Iran continues its nuclear program. Comparisons are being drawn to President Nixon's 1972 visit to Beijing, a moment when seemingly opposed political systems found common ground. India has demonstrated a commitment to global environmental efforts by voting in favor of the first global carbon tax on shipping at the International Maritime Organization in London, with the goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions from ships. Domestically, India is facing the harsh realities of climate change, as evidenced by severe thunderstorms that have caused at least 69 deaths across India and Nepal. In terms of international relations, the U.S. State Department has reaffirmed its support for India's pursuit of justice for the victims of the 26/11 terror attacks, following the extradition of a key suspect. However, relations are somewhat strained as the United States sanctioned Indian national jugwinder Singh Bra and 2 India-based entities for their role in transporting Iranian petroleum as part of Iran's shadow fleet, according to the U.S. Department of the Treasury. Tensions remain high in Indian-administered Kashmir, where recent firefights resulted in the deaths of an Indian army officer and suspected militants. India attributes the Kashmir militancy to Pakistan-sponsored terrorism, while many Kashmiris view it as a legitimate freedom struggle. Economically, India stands to potentially benefit from shifts in global trade, as a UN economist predicts that U.S. tariffs could shrink global trade by 3%, leading to trade shifts to India, Canada, and Brazil. Finally, there is growing social concern in India regarding the rising popularity of online betting and fantasy gaming, raising issues of addiction and financial exploitation among vulnerable populations. Turning to the United States, the State Department has reiterated its support for India's efforts to bring the perpetrators of the 26/11 terror attacks to justice, following the extradition of Tahawur Rana. In contrast, the U.S. sanctioned Jagwinder Singh Bra, an Indian national, and 2 India-based entities for transporting Iranian petroleum, alleging Bra owns shipping companies operating as part of Iran's shadow fleet, according to the U.S. Department of the Treasury. In domestic news, an Indian-origin councilman in the U.S. has been charged with racketeering, money laundering, and involvement in an illegal gambling scheme worth $3, underscoring issues of corruption and organized crime. A UN economist predicts that U.S. tariffs could shrink global trade by 3%, leading to trade shifts to India, Canada, and Brazil, which has implications for U.S. trade policy. Neighboring Nepal is also experiencing the devastating consequences of climate change, as severe thunderstorms have caused at least 69 deaths in both India and Nepal, highlighting the vulnerability of the region to extreme weather events. Japan is currently focused on both internal economic adjustments and strategic international alliances. Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba is directly tackling wage stagnation through meetings with the head of Japan's largest labor union umbrella group, following through on his commitment to address wage-related issues. To counter rising prices, the head of Japan's junior coalition party proposed a possible consumption tax reduction. This comes as surveys predict a 12% inflation rate over the next year, with 86.7% of people expecting prices to climb. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte is visiting Japan, underscoring the deepening partnership between Japan and NATO, even though Japan is not a member. This visit signals a strategic alignment in response to evolving global dynamics. Prime Minister Ishiba stressed the need for global cooperation at the opening of the World Expo 2025. Osaka cautioning against a fractured world grappling with crises after the COVID-19 pandemic, now complicated by conflicts and trade disputes. The expo, centered on designing a future society for our lives, aims to showcase a positive vision for the future. However, the event is facing challenges, with only 8.7 million advance tickets sold, falling short of the 14 million target. Ukraine is actively pursuing enhanced defense capabilities and strategic alliances amidst its ongoing conflict with Russia, eager to end the war as stated by its foreign minister at the Antalya Diplomacy Forum, which was attended by both Andriy Sybiha and Sergei Lavrov. To further this aim, Ukraine is dispatching a delegation to Washington to revitalize negotiations for a rare earths agreement, leveraging its substantial lithium deposits to align more closely with U.S. interests. Meanwhile, European leaders are formulating a post-war reassurance force plan for Ukraine, seeking U.S. commitment to security guarantees for Kyiv. DI drone makers are playing a vital role in Ukraine, providing crucial support to frontline fighters with 2 million drones produced last year in factories and small workshops. A Trump envoy has suggested establishing allied zones of control in Ukraine, focusing on areas west of the Dnipro River, separated from Russian-occupied areas in the east by a demilitarized zone. Prince Harry recently visited the Superhuman Center, a rehabilitation clinic in Lviv, to engage with war victims, while his father, King Charles, was in Italy. The U.S. remains deeply involved in diplomatic and economic efforts pertaining to Ukraine. Washington and Kyiv are actively negotiating a rare earths agreement deemed essential for aligning strategic objectives. A special envoy of former President Trump, Steve Witkoff, engaged in discussions with President Vladimir Putin in St. Petersburg to explore potential avenues for a peace settlement in Ukraine. The U.S. is also grappling with a 14.3% decline in UK tourists, reportedly due to apprehensions surrounding Trump's policies and rhetoric, along with incidents such as the arrest of backpacker Rebecca Burke. In the United Kingdom, Parliament convened in a rare Saturday session to address the steel industry, with MPs marking their attendance with selfies. This emergency session was triggered by the takeover of Chinese-owned British Steel and the potential ramifications of U.S. metal tariffs, focusing on the preservation of the country's last steel-producing factory. China has officially denied claims made by Ukraine's president regarding its citizens fighting for Russia in Ukraine. Beijing asserts that it advises its citizens to refrain from entering conflict zones. Russia continues to be embroiled in the ongoing conflict with Ukraine and has faced allegations regarding foreign fighters. A special envoy of former President Trump, Steve Witkoff, held talks with President Vladimir Putin in St. Petersburg to explore avenues for a peace deal in Ukraine. Israel's defense minister Israel Katz revealed intentions to broaden the military offensive throughout the Gaza Strip, calling for residents to evacuate conflict areas. This escalation follows a 2-month ceasefire with Hamas that ended on March 18. The resumed offensive has reportedly led to at least 1,563 deaths, exacerbating the already dire humanitarian crisis. A recent strike in Gaza resulted in the deaths of 10 family members. Investigators found that all those killed in specific Israeli strikes were women and children. An IDF unit implicated in the deaths of Palestinian paramedics in Gaza was led by Brig Gen Yehuda Vach, who has previously faced accusations of exhibiting contempt for human life. The ongoing conflict and the hostage situation are casting a shadow over Passover celebrations in Israel. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan accused Israel of attempting to sabotage Syria's revolution and create discord. Ukraine continues to grapple with the ongoing conflict as Russian strikes injured 4 individuals. Adding to the complexities, Kyiv announced the capture of 2 Chinese nationals in the Donetsk region, claiming they were fighting for Russia, a claim supported by U.S. officials who estimate over 100 Chinese mercenaries are aiding Moscow. Meanwhile, a U.S. envoy's remarks regarding a possible division of Ukraine stirred controversy. Defense Secretary Lloyd J. Austin III virtually attended Pete Hegseth's address, emphasizing ongoing support for Kyiv since the Russian invasion in 2022. In a notable international exchange, Russia released Ksenia Karelina, a U.S.-Russian dual national, imprisoned for donating to Ukraine relief efforts. In return, Germany released a German-Russian man accused of espionage. This exchange highlights the intricate diplomatic maneuvers amidst the backdrop of the Ukrainian conflict. Separately, Ksenia Petrova, a scientist who fled Russia after protesting the invasion of Ukraine, faces potential deportation after being jailed by ICE, raising concerns about her safety if returned to Russia. Russia's economic landscape has been impacted by the withdrawal of major international players. Boeing, for instance, ceased its operations in Russia following the invasion of Ukraine. However, Moscow has suggested that Boeing might be welcomed back should Donald Trump assume the presidency, signaling potential shifts in economic policy depending on future political developments. Argentina has successfully negotiated $42 billion in financial aid from the IMF, World Bank, and IDB. This funding aims to bolster the nation's moves to deregulate its economy and relax stringent currency controls. Finance Minister Luis Caputo expects an initial influx of $19 within the next 2 months. Integral to this financial support is a $20 billion arrangement with the IMF, with an immediate disbursement of $12 billion and a further $1 billion scheduled for June. These funds are specifically earmarked to support the gradual loosening of foreign exchange regulations after extensive discussions. Ecuador is gearing up for a tense runoff election. Voters will choose between Daniel Noboa, who has aligned himself with Trump-like policies, and Luisa Gonzalez, a leftist figure. Gonzalez aims to carry on the legacy of Rafael Correa. Political polarization is high. Security issues are dominating the campaign. Cities like Macala are struggling with drug violence. High unemployment is also a major concern for Ecuadorians. The nation is deeply divided between the 2 candidates. Canada is experiencing production adjustments at General Motors' Ingersoll plant, where operations are being temporarily suspended and staff reduced. This is due to lower demand for electric delivery vehicles. Simultaneously, Canada is bolstering its military presence in the Arctic, a strategic move to address climate change impacts and potential geopolitical tensions. The United States tariffs are impacting Canada's political landscape. These tariffs pose a challenge for Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, who is trying to focus voter attention on economic and crime-related issues. France is taking a leading role in Europe, addressing the war in Ukraine and upcoming tariffs under President Emmanuel Macron's guidance. The country's strong military could be key to developing an independent European defense sector, but hurdles need to be overcome. Within France, the government is dealing with worries from Muslim athletes about a possible hijab ban in sports. Turning to the United Kingdom, Prime Minister Keir Starmer attended a meeting in Brussels with defense ministers from the coalition of the Willing, co-led by France and the UK. Brazil's former President Jair Bolsonaro hospitalized with abdominal pain. The doctors report his condition is stable and surgery is not currently needed. Bolsonaro, age 70, has experienced ongoing health issues since a stabbing incident in 2018. He is reportedly considering a return to politics in 2026, even as he faces a criminal trial. Turning to Japan, Brazilian national Barbosa Anderson Robson is standing trial, accused of the murders of his wife, Minami Aramaki, age 29, and their 3-year-old daughter. Reports indicate the alleged crime took place following discussions regarding a divorce. Panama faces rising political tensions as opposition leaders denounce a security agreement with the United States, labeling it a camouflaged invasion in response to the deployment of US troops. The criticism intensified after a visit by US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and President Donald Trump's confirmation of the U.S. military presence. The opposition party has voiced concerns about the government's management of the diplomatic situation. Germany is deeply involved in the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, pledging further deliveries of weapons, systems to bolster Ukraine's defense capabilities. Simultaneously, Germany aims to enhance its own military readiness, seeking to become a more significant player in European security. This effort is hindered by a complex defense and national security apparatus, compounded by bureaucratic inefficiencies. Economically, Germany's chocolate producers are grappling with soaring cocoa prices, which will likely translate to higher prices for consumers, especially on seasonal treats. To counter the impact of new tariffs affecting businesses and workers, Germany has joined Italy, Portugal, and Spain in unveiling financial aid packages designed to alleviate economic pressures. European Union member states are navigating complex trade relationships, seeking to strengthen their collective position on the global stage. Amidst ongoing geopolitical tensions, the EU continues to provide substantial military aid to Ukraine, reinforcing its commitment to regional stability. Meanwhile, the increasing recruitment of European athletes by North American sports leagues highlights the continent's growing influence in international sport. Myanmar is facing a severe humanitarian crisis following a recent devastating earthquake. The United Nations is appealing for $275 million to provide critical assistance to survivors. Alarmingly, only 5% of the previously requested $1.10 billion in humanitarian aid for 5.5 million people has been funded to date. Compounding the crisis, a wave of AI-generated videos and deceptive images misrepresenting the earthquake's impact are circulating widely on social media. DW has initiated a fact-checking effort to combat the spread of this misinformation. Taiwan's small factories are currently navigating the choppy waters of unpredictable U.S. trade policies, creating an uncertain environment for businesses like Aegis CNC in Taichung, owned by Alex Tang. Tang, who employs 12 people, worries about the potential consequences for his export business. The island nation recently engaged in its inaugural tariff discussions with the United States. This follows the looming threat of a potential 32% tariff imposition by the U.S. on certain goods. These talks underscore the broader economic anxieties among Taiwanese enterprises, heavily dependent on trade with the United States, as they grapple with the ever-shifting landscape of international trade. Canada mourns the loss of Ted Kotcheff, the celebrated director behind iconic films like First Blood and Weekend at Bernie's, who passed away at 94. Kotcheff, also known for The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz, died in Nuevo Vallarta, Mexico, from heart failure, as confirmed by his daughter, Kate Kotcheff. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, Congolese forces freed at least 40 hostages. They were captured by the Allied Democratic Forces, ADF. The ADF is linked to the Islamic State. This group is one of over 100 armed factions causing violence in the east. The region is rich in minerals, but remains impoverished. The violence has created a major humanitarian crisis. Papua New Guinea was struck by a 6.2 magnitude earthquake off its coastline. Initial reports indicate no significant damage. The nation's location within the seismically active Ring of Fire makes it vulnerable to such events. Turkey is currently embroiled in controversy as Istanbul's mayor faces trial, sparking widespread protests. The European Union's response to Turkey's increasingly authoritarian behavior has been muted, likely due to Turkey's critical geopolitical position. Shifting focus to foreign policy, Turkey has accused Israel of trying to sabotage the Syrian revolution. Further, Turkey is a key backer of Syria's new leader, Ahmed al-Shara, and his Islamist group, which led the rebel coalition that removed Bashar al-Assad from power. United States, a judge has ruled that Columbia University activist Mahmoud Khalil can be deported based on his pro-Palestinian views, a decision influenced by potential foreign policy ramifications. President Trump's auto tariffs are still in effect, continuing to affect international trade relationships. Turning to the United Kingdom, the Jaguar Land Rover plant located in Solihull, England, has halted exports to the US. The plant employs 9,000 individuals, and the decision was directly influenced by the persisting auto tariffs implemented by the US government. Poland's presidential debate revealed significant internal disagreements on key national concerns. These include Russian aggression and potential shifts in US foreign policy. The possible removal of US troops from a base near the Ukrainian border has heightened worries about US commitment to Eastern European security. Transitioning to Canada, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government faces increasing scrutiny over its environmental policies. Recent reports suggest the nation is unlikely to meet its 2030 emissions reduction targets. This shortfall has drawn criticism from both domestic and international environmental groups. The controversy has ignited debates about Canada's role in global climate action. Moving to France, President Emmanuel Macron is navigating a complex political landscape following recent European Parliament elections. The far-right National Rally Party gained significant ground. This outcome puts increased pressure on Macron's centrist government. He is now considering potential cabinet reshuffles and policy adjustments to regain public trust. In the latest developments from Germany, Chancellor Olaf Scholz's coalition government is grappling with a slowing economy. Recent data indicates a decline in manufacturing output and rising inflation. The government is exploring fiscal stimulus measures to boost economic growth. These measures aim to mitigate the impact of global economic headwinds. In Australia, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's government is facing increasing pressure to address rising inflation. The Reserve Bank of Australia recently raised interest rates again. This aims to curb spending and bring inflation under control. The move has sparked debate about the government's fiscal policies and their impact on household budgets. Turning to Canada, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced new measures to support Ukraine. These include additional financial aid and military equipment. Canada continues to condemn Russia's aggression. The support package is intended to bolster Ukraine's defense capabilities. Meanwhile, in France, President Emmanuel Macron is grappling with widespread protests. These protests are against his proposed pension reforms. The reforms aim to raise the retirement age. Unions and citizens are fiercely opposing the changes, leading to disruptions across the country. Shifting focus to Germany, Chancellor Olaf Scholz is working to secure energy supplies. This comes amid ongoing concerns about dependence on Russian gas. Germany is seeking alternative sources and investing in renewable energy. The goal is to ensure energy security for the nation. In India, Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government is promoting economic growth. They are focusing on infrastructure development and attracting foreign investment. Recent policy changes aim to streamline regulations and boost manufacturing. This is part of the Make in India initiative. Over in Japan, Prime Minister Fumio Kishida is navigating complex geopolitical challenges. These include tensions in the region and concerns about North Korea's nuclear program. Japan is strengthening its alliances with key partners. They are also increasing its defense capabilities. Moving to Russia, President Vladimir Putin addressed the nation on the state of the economy. He emphasized the country's resilience in the face of Western sanctions. Putin outlined plans for further economic development and strengthening ties with other nations. In the United Kingdom, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is dealing with a cost of living crisis. Inflation and rising energy prices are impacting households across the country. The government is implementing measures to provide support to vulnerable families. They are also working to stabilize the economy. Lastly, in the United States, President Joe Biden is pushing for legislative action on climate change. His administration is promoting investments in renewable energy and sustainable infrastructure. The aim is to reduce emissions and create green jobs. The initiatives face challenges in Congress. Africa is exploring strategies to reduce its dependence on international aid by more effectively leveraging its mineral wealth. Simultaneously, there are initiatives to improve public opinion regarding vultures. These birds provide around $1.80 billion in sanitation services yearly to southern African ecosystems. Turning to Canada, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government faces increasing pressure to address the housing crisis. Rising interest rates and limited housing supply continue to push homeownership out of reach for many Canadians. The government is exploring various policy options, including increasing housing construction and implementing measures to curb speculative investment. In China, the government is implementing stricter regulations on the technology sector. These regulations aim to curb monopolistic practices and protect consumer data. Several major tech companies have faced increased scrutiny and fines. These actions reflect a broader effort to balance economic growth with social and political stability. Shifting to France, President Emmanuel Macron is grappling with ongoing protests against pension reforms. The reforms, which raise the retirement age, have sparked widespread discontent. The government insists the changes are necessary to ensure the long-term sustainability of the pension system. Moving across the Atlantic to Mexico, the government is working to strengthen its economic ties with the United States and Canada under the USMCA trade agreement. Increased investment in infrastructure and manufacturing is a key priority. Mexico aims to become a major hub for nearshoring, attracting businesses seeking to relocate production closer to North American markets. In the United Kingdom, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is focused on tackling inflation and stabilizing the economy. The government has implemented a series of fiscal measures, including tax increases and spending cuts. The goal is to reduce the national debt and restore confidence in the UK's economic outlook. The United States is actively engaged in diplomatic efforts to de-escalate tensions in Eastern Europe. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has held talks with various international leaders. The U.S. is reaffirming its commitment to supporting its allies and upholding international law. In Spain, the national public broadcaster has requested a formal debate concerning Israel's involvement in the upcoming Eurovision Song Contest hosted in Switzerland, alluding to unspecified reservation. Indonesia's President Prabowo Subianto has condemned the Gaza violence. He cited it as evidence of a broken international order. Prabowo also criticized Western nations' unilateral actions. Meanwhile, wealthy Indonesians are reportedly shifting assets overseas. Concerns about Prabowo's policies and economic stability are fueling this capital flight. The rupiah's decline in March further exacerbated these anxieties. Chinese electric vehicle manufacturers, facing us tariffs, are increasingly targeting Southeast Asia, presenting challenges to Malaysia's automotive industry. The arrival of discounted Chinese EVs worries Malaysia about potential job losses in its auto sector. In response to US tariff threats, Malaysia is pushing for a united ASEAN stance. However, ASEAN members, including Vietnam, are also pursuing individual trade deals. This showcases the tension between regional unity and national economic interests amid global trade pressures. Vietnam faces potential economic headwinds due to the possibility of 46% tariffs imposed by former US President Trump. This would disproportionately affect Vietnam's export-driven economy. Samsung's heavy reliance on Vietnamese manufacturing makes it particularly vulnerable, potentially harming both Samsung and Vietnam's economic stability. The existing scale of Samsung's operations in Vietnam positions the company as a prime target should these tariffs take effect later this year. Serbia is bracing for a pro-government rally organized in support of President Aleksandar Vučić amidst rising political tensions. The rally comes after sustained anti-corruption protests challenging Vučić's administration. The government has responded by intensifying its crackdown on critics, with reports of activists being questioned by police and threatened with legal repercussions. These actions underscore the polarized political environment and the government's attempts to maintain authority in the face of public discontent. Hungary is grappling with its first foot-and-mouth disease outbreak in over half a century. The outbreak has led to confirmed cases in livestock. This triggered immediate border closures to contain the spread. Authorities are culling affected animals as part of the response. Slovakia is also reporting its first foot-and-mouth disease outbreak in more than 50 years. The outbreaks in both countries are causing concern among agricultural sectors. The United States is preparing to deport over 10,000 individuals to Afghanistan and Cameroon in May and June. This action follows the previous administration's decision to terminate temporary protected status. The status had allowed over 14,600 Afghans and 7,900 Cameroonians to legally reside in the U.S. The United Kingdom saw an antiquities dealer, Callis Gallery in Mayfair, pull an ancient Greek black figure amphora from an upcoming sale. The decision came after evidence surfaced connecting the artifact to a known smuggler, prompting scrutiny from experts in the field of illicit antiquities. Let's begin. In a move to bolster its defense capabilities, the United States has announced a new security assistance package for Ukraine valued at $150 million. This package includes artillery rounds, counter-mortar radars, and other essential equipment to aid Ukraine in its ongoing conflict. Concurrently, the U.S. is also focusing on domestic issues, with the Federal Reserve maintaining steady interest rates, signaling a cautious approach to monetary policy amid concerns about inflation and economic growth. Shifting focus to the European Union, member states are grappling with new regulations aimed at curbing the power of large tech companies. These regulations target anti-competitive practices and aim to create a fair digital marketplace for smaller businesses and consumers. Meanwhile, in Russia, President Vladimir Putin has signed a decree simplifying the process for foreigners to join the Russian army. This move is seen as an effort to address manpower shortages in the military amid the continuing war in Ukraine. The decree allows foreign nationals to apply for Russian citizenship through a simplified procedure if they enlist. Turning to Canada, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is facing increasing pressure over rising housing costs. The government is considering new measures to address affordability issues, including potential tax reforms and increased investment in affordable housing projects. Across the Pacific, Australia is implementing new cybersecurity measures to protect critical infrastructure. These measures will require companies in key sectors to enhance their defenses against cyber attacks and report incidents to the government. Renewed trust in the EU has been observed among Southeast Asian elites, positioning Brussels as a preferred middle power between the US and China, though Japan is also gaining traction. Turning to Israel, talks are underway with Turkey in an effort to prevent conflict in Syria, where the Druze population resists the Syrian government's attempts to disband militias. New Zealand's Foreign Minister Winston Peters has completed his visit to Tonga and is now traveling to Hawaii. In the United States, Colonel Susanna Myers, who headed the U.S. base in Greenland, was dismissed after reports emerged that she distanced herself from Vice President J.D. Vance's criticism of Denmark. Further, former Trump administration officials have refused to comply with a judge's order to provide a roadmap for the release of a Maryland man mistakenly deported to a Salvadoran prison in El Salvador. Slovakia's economy is vulnerable to potential car tariffs imposed by President Trump. Turkish tourism and investment are increasing in Greece, with Turkish citizens purchasing properties and acquiring golden visas for EU access, sparking concern among government opponents. In Nigeria, the Navy and government are evicting communities from the lagoon area around Lagos to make way for luxury developments. Kathmandu, in Nepal, is experiencing a surge in pollution levels, making it the world's most polluted capital with extremely poor air quality. Singapore is seeing an increasing presence of mainland Chinese food brands, generating discussions about cultural preservation and the coexistence of different cuisines. Finally, in Sudan, paramilitaries killed 57 civilians in North Darfur in an attack targeting the capital, El Fasher, and a nearby camp severely affected by famine. And that's a wrap for today's news, because even headlines need a nap. Stay curious, stay kind, and let the noise fade as you find your quiet. Take care, stay awesome, and I'll see you next time on WHAM Today.